I had killed enough men by the time I rode into Lantern Hollow that I no longer counted them, and I had told myself for the better part of 2 years that I was done. Done with the trade, done with the towns that needed a hard man and despised him for it the morning after. I wanted a stove, a roof that didn't leak, and a stretch of days where nobody knew my name. What I got instead was a woman standing alone on a porch with 9 riders strung out in her yard, and a thing in me I'd buried so deep I'd forgotten where I put the shovel. It was October, the cottonwoods along the weed here gone the color of a struck match, the high passes already dusted white. I'd come down out of the notch with a tired roan and $40, and the notion that Cobb's Crossing was far enough from everywhere that a man could disappear into it. The valley sat in a long green cup between 2 ridges, Quail Creek running silver down the middle of it, and from the trail above it looked like the kind of place God makes when he's in a forgiving mood. I should have known better. The pretty ones always have something rotten at the heart, same as a good apple. I smelled the trouble before I saw it. Burnt timber on the wind, the particular sourness of a barn that's been put to the torch and rained on. Then I came around the shoulder of the hill and saw the place, a tidy clapboard house, a corral, a stone spring house, and the riders sitting their horses in the dooryard easy as Sunday, and the woman on the steps facing them with a shotgun she wasn't pointing at anything yet. I drew rein in the trees. That was the smart thing. A man minds his own grave and lets the world dig its others. I'd dug enough of mine. "We'll ask one more time, Miss Lyle," the big one was saying. He had a voice that carried, the kind that liked carrying. "Where'd your daddy put it?" "I told you." Her voice carried too, but it didn't like it. It was steady the way a hand is steady when it's costing the person something to keep it so. "He didn't tell me. He didn't tell anybody. That was the whole point of him, Mr. Quill. People trusted him because he was the one man in this valley who could keep a thing shut." "Then he died stupid," Quill said, "and you'll die the same." He didn't say it cruel. He said it bored. That was the worst of it, the boredom. I'd ridden with men like that long ago before I learned what it cost. A man who's bored with the idea of killing you is a man who's done it so often it's gone gray on him like meat left out. I felt the old cold come up my spine, the cold I'd been running from across 4 territories, and I thought, asterisk not your grave, Wade. Ride on. Then a boy came out of the house behind her. He couldn't have been 7. He had her chin and somebody else's ears, and he was holding a wooden horse a man had whittled for him, and he stood in the doorway looking at all those big men on their big horses, and he didn't cry. He just took hold of the woman's skirt with his free hand, and she reached back without looking and put her palm flat against his chest and pressed him behind her, into the dark of the doorway, with a gentleness that had nothing to do with the shotgun in her other hand. And the cold went out of me, and something hotter came up in its place, and I knew I wasn't riding on. I never could when there were children. That was the whole tragedy of my life in one sentence, and I'd spend the rest of this story telling you why. I came down out of the trees at a walk. No hurry. Hurry tells men things. I let the roan pick his way down the slope and across the creek ford, water curling cold over his fetlocks, and I came up the lane into that yard with my hat tipped back and my hands easy on the horn, like a man who'd lost his way and meant to ask after it. 9 heads turned. I counted them the way you count cards, not the faces, the hands, the holsters, the angles. Quill was the center of it, a slab of a man on a good gray, with a beard going iron and eyes the flat color of creek ice. 2 on his left were young and eager, the kind that shoot to be seen shooting. The rest were working men of the trade, watchful, none of them fools. 9 guns is a thing even a fast man doesn't beat. I knew that going in. I wasn't there to beat 9 guns. I was there to make 9 guns do arithmetic they didn't want to do. "Afternoon," I said. "I'm looking for the road to Cobb's Crossing. Took a wrong fork up at the notch." "You found a private yard," Quill said. "Found it at a bad time, ride on." "I would," I said. "Only the ladies got a scattergun out and you boys have got your irons loose, and a man rides into the middle of that. He likes to know which way to duck." I let my gaze drift over the burnt timber where the barn had been, the new black scar of it. Looks like you've had a fire. We've had a misunderstanding, Quill said. Those'll burn a barn, I agreed. I looked at the woman then full on for the first time. Ada Lyle. I didn't know her name yet, but I'd remember the look of her the rest of my days, maybe 30, maybe a hard 28, brown hair come loose from its pins. A face that wasn't pretty the way a magazine is pretty, but was the kind you'd trust your money and your children to, which as it turned out was exactly what her father's neighbors had done. Her eyes came to me and they didn't ask for help. That was the thing about her I'd come to love, though it'd take me a season to name it. She never once asked. She measured. She looked at me the way she looked at the weather, deciding whether I was the kind that passed over or the kind that flooded the bottoms. This is my land, she said to me, even and clear. These men are leaving it. They don't look like they're leaving it, I said. No, she said, they don't. I got down off the roan. Slow. I dropped the reins so he'd ground tie, and I stepped clear of him so nobody could think I'd use him for cover, and I walked up into the middle of all that quiet with my hands hanging open at my sides, and I stopped between the bottom of her steps and the noses of their horses, and I said the only word I had. Enough. It's a small word. I've said it to a lot of men. Most of the time it doesn't work, and you find out fast which kind of day you're having. But I'd learned how to say it so that the man hearing it understood the whole sentence underneath enough. And I have done this before, and I am tired, and a tired man with nothing left to lose is the most expensive thing you will buy today. Quill studied me a long moment. His eyes went to my hands, my hips, the set of my shoulders, the worn place on my holster where a thing rides that's ridden a long time. I watched him do the arithmetic. 9 of us, 1 of him. But he came down off that hill on purpose, and he's standing in the open on purpose, and he hasn't reached, and a man who hasn't reached by now is a man who's sure he won't need to be first. I watched him add it up and not like the sum. This your fight, stranger, he said. Wasn't, I said. Seems it's turning into one. Over a woman you never met. Over a yard with a child in it, I said, and 9 grown men in it and a fire where a barn was. I've got simple tastes, Quill. I don't care for the look of it. A small thing happened then that told me more about Ada Lyle than a year of talking would. One of the young, eager ones eased his horse a half step, working an angle to get me between him and Quill, and before he'd finished the move, the shotgun came up off her hip and laid its black eyes on his belt buckle. Easy, no fuss, like she was pointing out a hawk to her boy. She didn't say a word. She just declined to let him have the angle. The young man stopped. And I understood that whatever else she was not a thing being fought over. She was in the fight, and she'd been in it before I got there, and she'd be in it after. Quill weighed it all and made the only choice a man makes when the price has gone up and the goods aren't going anywhere. We'll be back, Miss Lyle, he said, gathering his gray. Money like that doesn't keep. Folks get nervous. Folks start to wonder why one stubborn woman gets to sit on what belongs to the whole valley. He looked at me. And you, friend, this is a small country. I'll know your name by supper. Wade Harlan, I said, to save him the trouble. I'd long since stopped hiding it. A hidden name only makes the legend bigger when it comes out. Something moved behind his eyes. Not fear. Men like Quill don't fear, they appraise. He'd heard the name. Most men in the trade had. He filed it where he kept the prices, and he turned his horse, and he and his 9 rode out of that yard at a walk, because riding out slow is how a man says this isn't over without using the words. I stood in the yard until the dust of them was gone over the rise. Then my hands started to shake, the way they always did after. And I put them in my coat so the woman wouldn't see, and I turned around. She'd lowered the shotgun but not set it down. The boy had come out from behind her and stood against her hip, openly staring at me now, the wooden horse forgotten in his hand. You shouldn't have done that, she said. No, ma'am, I agreed. Habitual failing of mine. They'll come back. They were coming back anyway. I only changed the date. I nodded at the burnt place. How long's this been going on? She was quiet a moment, deciding again whether that passed or whether that stayed. Then she set the shotgun against the door frame, the way you only do in front of someone you've made a decision about, and she said, "Since they killed my father, 6 weeks Sunday." She smoothed the boy's hair without looking at him. "You'll want coffee. You came a long way to stand in a stranger's yard and get yourself killed. The least I can do is feed you first." That was Ada, the least she could do, as if there were a great deal more and this was only the floor of it. I should tell you about her father because everything turned on him, and on the kind of man he'd been, which was the rarest kind there is, a man other men trust with money. His name was Tom Lyle, and he'd come to Lantern Hollow before there was a town, when Cobb's Crossing was a ferry and a smithy and a notion. The homesteaders who followed were poor folk, the way they always are, scraping a living out of a high cold valley a long way from any bank a man could believe in. The nearest real bank was 3 days' ride at Fort Greer, and the road there ran through country where the stage got robbed so regular the company had stopped insuring it. So the people of the valley did what poor people have always done. They trusted one of their own. They pooled what little they could spare against the bad winters, the doctor bills, the seed money for spring, a few dollars here, a gold piece there, an old woman's whole savings sewn in a sock. And they gave it to Tom Lyle to keep, because Tom Lyle had never in 40 years told a lie that anyone could find, and because he had a way of keeping a thing that made you feel it was safer with him than it would have been in your own hand. By the time he died Ada told me that first night across her kitchen table, near $11,000 of it. $11,000 of widows' savings and orphans' futures and old men's hope of dying out of the poorhouse. It was the whole liquid wealth of a valley, and it was hidden, and only Tom Lyle had known where. That was the point of it, she said. She'd put the boy, his name was Davy, to bed in the next room, and she sat with her hands around a cup she wasn't drinking. He used to say, money's only safe if exactly one person can find it and that person can't be made to talk. He wouldn't tell the council. He wouldn't tell the preacher. He wouldn't tell me. Her mouth tightened. He always said he'd write it down and seal it with the lawyer at Fort Greer against him dying sudden. He kept meaning to. Then a horse rolled on him, or there was a fever, or it was lambing, and the years went, and he never did. And then Quill heard about it. How's a man like Quill hear about a valley's grocery money? Somebody talked. Her jaw worked. Somebody always talks. A teamster, a clerk at Greer who knows. Word got out that the whole Hollow's savings sat in one place with one old man minding it, and Quill came up over the notch the same as you did and looked down on this valley and saw not a town, a safe with one lock and the key inside an old man's head. And the old man wouldn't open. They came at night. She said it flat, the way you say a thing you've worn smooth from saying it to yourself in the dark. I was up here with Davy. My husband died of the lung 2 winters back and I'd moved home to keep house for. They took him out to the barn. They had all night and he was 61 years old and he had a bad heart. And in the morning the barn was burning and my father was dead in the yard and they hadn't gotten one word out of him. Not one. Her eyes came up to me, dry and terrible. He died keeping $11,000 that wasn't even his. He died so a widow at Cobb's Crossing could bury her husband proper next spring and a man on Spruce Creek could buy seed. That's the kind of man my father was. And these men think I'm sitting on a treasure I'm too greedy to share. She laughed, one hard note. I don't know where it is, Mr. Harlan. He never told me. He died before he told me. The joke of it, the awful joke, is that I'm being tortured for a secret I don't have. I sat with that. The stove ticked. Outside the wind walked the burnt ribs of the barn. Does Quill believe you? I asked. No, she said. And neither does the town. That's the worst part if you want the worst part. The town half thinks I'm holding out. Their own money, and they look at me sideways in the street because if I just tell the gang would go away and leave us be. They're so afraid of Quill they'd rather believe a lie about me than a true thing about themselves, that they handed all they had to one man and never made him write it down, and now there's no getting it back, and there's a wolf in the valley because of it, and it's nobody's fault but their own foolishness and a good man's stubbornness. She turned the cup. So I'm alone in it. The gang thinks I'm a vault. The town thinks I'm a thief. And my father's in the ground 6 weeks, and I have a boy to raise and a place to hold, and not one soul in the world standing on my side of the fence. She looked up, until a stranger rode down a hill and said a foolish word. Enough's a good word, I said. I've staked worse on it. She almost smiled. It was the first time, and it cost her, and I found I wanted to be a man who could make it cost her less. I slept that night in the spring house, on a pallet of feed sacks, with my gun belt hung where my hand could find it, and I lay awake a long time listening to the valley. I want to tell you I decided to stay and fight for her. I hadn't. I told myself 100 miles of lies on the way down that hill, and I told myself one more, that I'd see her safe to the town, that I'd put the fear of Wade Harlan into Quill's bunch for a day or two, and then I'd ride on to wherever a man goes who's done. I'd been telling myself I was done for 2 years. I'd get to be done someday. Just not yet. Just not while there was a boy with somebody else's ears holding a wooden horse in a doorway. Because here's the part I hadn't told her and wouldn't for a long while. I'd had a girl once. A wife and a girl in a valley not unlike this one. A long way east and a long time ago, before I was Wade Harlan the name and was only Wade the man. And men had come, not so different from Quill's men, over a thing I had that they wanted, which was a piece of bottom land with water on it, and I had been away when they came, away earning the money to keep that very land, hearing my gun out because a gun was the one thing I'd ever been worth anything with. I'd come home to a burned house and 2 graves the neighbors had dug, and I had spent the years since making the men who did it answer for it, 1 and 2 and 3 at a time across the territories, until there were none of them left, and I found the thing I'd been chasing wasn't peace and wasn't even justice. It was just more graves, and now they were all dug and I was still standing in the cold beside them with a gun in my hand and nobody left to use it on. That's the man who rode into Lantern Hollow, a man who'd already lost the fight he was now being asked to fight again. You'll understand, then, why I couldn't leave. A man doesn't get a second chance at the thing that broke him. And here, against all the sense in the world, was the thing that broke me, set up on a green valley floor exactly as it had been before, with the riders and the woman and the child and the fire, and a chance, this one time, to be standing in the yard when they came instead of 100 miles off earning blood money. I'd have stayed if she'd thrown rocks at me. The Lord has a hard sense of humor, handing a man his own grief back as a gift. I stayed. The next morning I rode into Cobb's Crossing to take its measure, and the town took mine right back. It was a one-street town the way they all were, a mercantile, a smithy, a church with a bell, a saloon called the Wheat Ear with a porch full of men who went quiet when I rode past. They knew who I was by then. Quill had been as good as his word about supper. A name like mine moves through a frightened town like a cold draft under a door. Men looked at my hands. The barber found business inside. A woman pulled a child off the boardwalk by the collar. I'd seen it 1,000 times and it never got easier. The way decent folk recoil from the only kind of man who'll stand between them and the wolf. The way they need you and can't stand the sight of you. The way they'll let you do their killing and then not meet your eye at the funeral. The marshal's office was a small frame building with a tin star painted on the window, faded. The man inside was old, with a white mustache and a careful way of not looking at the rifle rack behind him, which told me everything. His name was Prout. He'd been a good marshal once, you could see the ghost of it on him, but he was old and Quill had 9 guns, and the town had stopped paying him to be brave. "You're Harlan," he said. "I am. You stood up to Quill out at the Lyle place yesterday." "I did." He rubbed his face. "Mister, I'll be plain with you because I'm too old to be anything else. I can't help you. I've got no deputies. Quill ran the last one out of the valley in July, put a bullet through his window with a note wrapped round it. The county seat's at Fort Greer and the federal man there's got 6 counties and 1 horse. I've sent 3 letters. I expect they line the bottom of a drawer." He looked at me, and for a second the ghost of the good marshal looked out. "If you mean to fight that bunch, you'll do it alone and you'll lose, and a good woman and her boy'll pay for the stirring up after you're dead. So my advice, for what an old man's advice is worth, ride on. Take her with you if she'll go. There's no winning here. There's only how many graves." It was honest, and it was probably right, and I thanked him for it and didn't take it. Because riding out, you see, was the one thing that wouldn't work. Quill wasn't after me. He was after a secret he believed Ada Lyle was keeping. Taking her and the boy and running only meant he'd hunt us, or worse, he'd burn the valley down behind us out of spite and call it her fault for running with the money. The $11,000 wasn't going anywhere because, and this was the thing I kept turning over, it genuinely was hidden and genuinely lost, and Quill genuinely could not get it, no matter what he did to her, because she did not have it to give. He was a wolf at a door with no handle, and a wolf like that doesn't leave. He gnaws. He'd gnaw that valley to the bone over a thing nobody could give him, until somebody died of it, and that somebody was going to be a woman with a child, and I'd seen that exact death before, and I would not see it twice. So the puzzle wasn't how do I beat 9 guns. The puzzle was asterisk how do I make Quill stop wanting the thing he can't have. And the only way I knew to make a greedy man stop wanting a treasure was to make him believe he had it, or make him watch it slip through his fingers in a way that turned his own men against him. Greed's a useful disease in your enemy, if you've the stomach to feed it. I didn't have the shape of the plan yet. I only had the shape of the problem. I rode back out to the Lyle place turning it over, and Ada met me in the yard with the boy and a look that asked, without asking, whether I'd run while I was gone. I hadn't. I think that was the moment she started to believe I might be whether that stayed. The weeks that followed were the strangest peace I ever knew, hung as it was over a pit. Quill didn't come back at once. That was his way, let the fear do the work, let the town stew, let the woman lie awake. So there was a kind of quiet, and in the quiet I did the things a man does on a place that needs a man. I rebuilt the corral the fire had taken. I patched the springhouse roof and split a winter's wood and mended the harness and broke the 2-year-old colt Tom Lyle hadn't lived to break. I'm no rancher. But I'd grown up on land before I'd ever grown up around guns, and my hands remembered it, the honest tiredness of it, the way a fence post wants seeding and a colt wants gentling, and I found, I'll be honest with you, because we're a long way in now, I found I was happy. For the first time since the graves. I'd wake in the cold spring house and hear the boy chasing the hens and the woman at the stove, and I'd lie there in the gray light afraid to move. The way you're afraid to move when a wild things come close and might startle. The boy took to me first. Children always know before grown folks do. Davy started shadowing me at my work, handing me nails, holding the colt's halter, asking the endless questions of a 7-year-old. Why's the gun heavy? Did you ever shoot a bear? Do you have a boy? I told him no, I never had a boy, in a voice that made Ada look up sharp from the wash because she heard the lie and the true word the way she heard everything. She never asked me about it. That was her gift, the not asking. She let a man come to a thing in his own time, or not at all. She and I circled each other careful as 2 cats. We were neither of us young, and we were neither of us soft, and we'd both buried the person we'd planned our lives around. And there's a particular slowness to 2 people like that finding their way toward each other. No foolishness in it. No swooning. Just a long, careful test of whether this one, too, was going to be taken away. We talked in the evenings on the porch after Davy was down, the cold coming up out of the creek bottom, and she told me about her father and her husband in the valley, and I told her not all of it, not yet, about the land I'd had once and lost, and she heard the size of the wound under the small words and never poked it. One night a hard frost was on, and we sat close for the warmth without either of us calling it that, and she said, looking out at the dark where the barn had been, "Why are you doing this, Wade?" "Doing what?" "Splitting another man's wood, fixing another woman's fence, standing between a stranger and 9 guns over money that isn't even there." She turned and looked at me straight the way she did. You could have ridden on a dozen times. The marshal told you to. I have told you to. What is it you're standing in this yard for?" I was a long time answering. The honest answer was too big to lift. So I gave her a piece of it, the truest piece I could carry. "I had a place like this once," I said. "Bottom land with water, a family on it. My voice did a thing I didn't like and I let it. I was off earning the money to keep it when the men came. I wasn't standing in the yard." I looked at the burnt timber. "I've spent 10 years making sure I never again wasn't standing in the yard. That's all. That's the whole of it. You didn't ask me to stay and you don't owe me for it, and I'm not staying for you exactly. I'm staying because there's a yard and this time I'm in it. You understand?" She was quiet a long moment. Then she put her hand over mine on the cold porch rail, not soft, not a swoon, just a flat warm pressure, one hard hand over another, and she said, "I understand." And that was the whole of our courting that night. A burned barn, a frost, and one true sentence each. I'd take it over 1,000 promenades. Some things you don't have to dress up. You just lay them down where the other person can see, and you leave them there, and you let the leaving them there be the promise. I haven't said enough about Ada's part in what came after, and I want to because the way these stories get told, it's always the gun that wins, and the woman's only the thing the gun wins for. That's a lie, and it's a lie I'd be ashamed to leave in a story about her. Ada Lyle was smarter than I was and braver in the way that counts, the slow daily way, and the plan that finally broke Quill's bunch was 3/4 hers. I had the gun. She had the wits. It took both, and she'd have managed her 3/4 whether or not a stranger ever rode down that hill. Only it would have cost her more, and might have cost her everything, and that's the part I got to change. Here's how the wits came in. We were at the table one night and Davy was asleep, and I was cleaning the colt's split hoof and not making much of the silence, when Ada set down her sewing and said, "He'll never stop wanting it." "No," I said, "greedy men don't." "Then we have to make him stop, or make him able to get it, which is the same thing except there's nothing to get." She pressed her fingers to her eyes. "It's the lostness of it that's the trap, Wade. If the money were real and findable, this would end. He'd take it, the town would be ruined and bitter but alive, and he'd ride on to the next valley. It's because the money can't be found that he can't leave. He thinks I'm holding out. He'll keep coming forever, because in his mind there's always one more screw to turn that'll make me talk." And there it was, the whole shape of it, laid on the table between us by her and not by me. "So we give him a place to find it," I said slowly. She looked up. "We can't give him the real money," I said, "because there isn't any to give and nobody knows where it is. But that's the same as saying nobody can prove it isn't asterisk somewhere. If your father hid it so well that 6 weeks of Quill couldn't find it, then it could be anywhere, including a place we choose." I watched her get it. It was a fine thing to watch, like a lamp coming up in a window. "We make a treasure," she said. "We make him a place, and we let his own greed carry him to it. And we make sure," I said, "that the law is standing in the room when he reaches for it. Because a man who breaks into a hidden cache that everybody in 3 counties has heard the legend of, with a federal warrant waiting, that man hangs, or runs, and either way he's out of your valley. We don't have to beat 9 guns, Ada. We have to make 9 guns commit the one crime that brings the law that's too lazy to come for a frightened town but'll come fast for a robbed strongbox with a federal seal on it." "The federal man at Fort Greer," she said, "Prout's letters." "Prout's letters are about a scared town. Towns don't move the federal man. You know what moves a federal man? $11,000 and a famous outlaw caught with his hand in it. That's a career. That's the thing he'll ride 3 days for." I set down the colt's hoof. "We don't need the marshal to find us brave. We need the marshal to find us valuable asterisk." We sat with it. Outside, the wind walked the valley. And slowly, across that kitchen table, over the next several nights, the 2 of us built the trap that would take Quill's bunch. And I want to be clear that the building of it was a marriage before either of us said the word. 2 people leaning over a problem with their heads close, finishing each other's thinking. until the line between her plan and mine wore away and it was just ours. This was the bones of it. There was a strong box. Tom Lyle had had one, a real one, iron-bound, that the gang had already found and pried open and found empty. Because of course it was empty. The money was never in the obvious box. We took that empty box and we made it a lie. Ada, who could do a fine hand, wrote out a ledger in her father's style. She had his real ledgers to copy from, a ledger that named the deposits, the widows and the homesteaders and their sums, $11,000 of it down to the dollar, and at the bottom, in a cramped private hand, a line. Sums removed for safety to the new place, see deed. And we made a deed, not to land, to a thing. A paper that referred, in the careful coded way a cautious old man would write it, to a location. The old assay vault under the burned stamp mill up at the sinks, where Quill's own bunch was holed up. That was the wicked beauty of it, and it was Ada's stroke, not mine. Put it where they live, she'd said, eyes bright and hard. Put the treasure under their own feet. Quill's been camping 6 weeks on top of the very thing he's torturing me for. When he reads that ledger he'll go half mad. And he'll have to break into a place to get it, break into a vault with tools in the open, leaving every sign of a planned robbery. She'd smiled then, the real smile, the dangerous one. He's been so busy being a wolf at my door, he never once dug under his own. Now, there had to be something in that vault, or the trick collapsed the moment he opened it. So we made the something. We took the empty strongbox and we filled it, not with $11,000 we didn't have, but with what looks in a dark vault by lantern to a man whose blood is up, like wealth. Rolls of paper sized like banknotes, sashed and tied. A layer of real coin on top. Every dollar Ada had and every dollar I had, 40 of mine and 110 of hers, scattered bright over the paper so the first grab came up gold. And the ledger and the deed atop it all. A man who pries open a box and sees coins spill, and a ledger that names the sum doesn't count the bills underneath. He grabs. He's already counting his share. And while he's grabbing, the federal man who he'd brought up quiet over 3 weeks of careful letters, not Prute's frightened letters, but letters in Ada's father's surviving hand and my name signed under them. The Lyle savings, 11,000, the Quill gang, a date, a place. That federal man, who'd ridden 3 days for exactly this, would be standing in the dark of the mill with a shotgun and a warrant and a half-dozen deputies sworn at Greer. And Quill's bunch would commit, all 9 at once. With witnesses and a paper trail, the single provable federal crime that turned a frightened valley's word against an unkillable wolf into a hanging matter for the United States. It hung on greed. It hung on Quill being unable, once he believed the treasure was real and under his own camp, to keep his own men from it, because 9 greedy men told there's $11,000 under their boots do not wait politely. They fall on it and they fall out among themselves over it, and that falling out was the last thing we built into the trap and the thing that made it certain. Ada saw that too. Treasure doesn't just draw thieves, she said. It turns them on each other. Give 9 men 1 box, and watch how fast it's 9 men in 1 box. The hard part wasn't the building. The hard part was the bait, getting Quill to find the ledger in a way he'd believe. A thing handed over is suspected. A thing stolen is believed, so we made him steal it. We let it be known, through the one channel we knew leaked, the teamster who drank at the Wheat Ear and carried tailies up to the sinks for the price of his whiskey, that Ada Lyle had finally cracked. That grief and fear had worn her down and she'd remembered, or found, a paper of her father's, and meant to take it to the lawyer at Fort Greer before the snow closed the pass. We let it be known she'd ride out Thursday. And we made sure the teamster heard, too, the worst and most useful detail, that the paper named where the money was. Quill did exactly what a wolf does. He couldn't let that paper reach Fort Greer, a lawyer, a recorded deed, the law involved on her terms instead of his. He had to take it on the road in the dark, the way he took everything. And so on Wednesday night, the night before the ride that was never going to happen, 4 of Quill's men came down to the Lyle place to do what they'd done to her father, to take the paper out of the house by force, quiet, before she could carry it anywhere. I was waiting for them, not with the 9. With 4 in the dark on ground I'd spent 3 weeks learning, with Ada and the boy long since gone to the marshals in town, and the lamps left burning in an empty house to draw the moths. I'd like to tell you it was a great fight. It wasn't. It was 4 men coming careful through a dooryard expecting a sleeping woman, and a man they'd forgotten about coming out of the dark of the spring house behind them with a cocked piece and that same small word. Enough. 3 of them had the sense to put their hands up. They'd no stomach for dying over another man's errand at a disadvantage in the dark. The 4th, one of the young eager ones, reached, because the young ones always reach, and I put a bullet through the meat of his gun arm, and he sat down in the dirt and cried. And that was the only blood spilled in the whole business, and it was a young fool's arm, and he kept it. I'm telling you that plainly because I'm old now and I've found I want the true tally remembered. 1 arm that mended. After 10 years of graves, 1 arm that mended. It was the cleanest night's work of my life, and I owe the cleanness of it to Ada Lyle's wits, which arranged things so that the gun barely had to speak. We tied the 3 sound ones and we let them think they found, scattered in the struggle, half burnt at the lamp as if Ada had tried to destroy it, a copy of the deed. The one that named the assay vault under the sinks. We let them carry that home to Quill like dogs carrying back a poisoned bone. The arm-shot boy we sent ahead loud and frightened, full of the night, to tell Quill that the Harlan gun had been waiting, and the woman had run for the marshal, and there was a paper. There was a paper asterisk, and it said the money'd been moved years back to the old vault, the vault right under their own camp. And then we waited 2 days, and let greed do what greed does. I won't pretend I knew it would hold. The last 2 days were the longest of my life. Ada and Davy stayed in town under the marshal's roof, and old Prout surprised us both. The ghost of the good marshal came all the way out and stood up straight again. Once there was a plan that didn't just ask him to die, and he rode hard to meet the federal man and his deputies coming up from Greer, and guided them quiet into the timber above the sinks, the night we judged Quill would go for the vault. I went up too, because I wasn't going to send other men into a thing I'd built and stand off from it. A man who builds a trap stands by it. And we lay in the cold timber above the old burned stamp mill and watched the sinks, and we waited to see whether a greedy man would do the greedy thing. He did, of course he did. We heard them before we saw them, Quill's bunch, what was left of it, 6 guns now, down in the ravine working at the old vault door with bars and a borrowed forge sledge, lanterns swinging, the whole camp awake and feverish, and we could hear them even from the timber arguing, the voices coming up the rock, the shares being fought over before the door was even open, even split. Like hell even, I held the woman 3 weeks. Quill takes the deed, who says Quill takes the deed. Ada had called it to the dollar. 1 box, 9 men, and the falling out arrived before the treasure did. The door came open near midnight with a sound like a bell cracking, and they fell on that strongbox in the lantern light, and the coin spilled bright the way we'd built it to. And there was a half-second where every man in that ravine had his hands in another man's treasure and his back to the dark. And the federal man, who had ridden 3 days for exactly this, and had no fear in him at all because to him, it was simply the best night's work of his career walking up out of the ground. Stepped to the lip of the ravine with a lantern of his own and a shotgun and 6 sworn deputies fanned in the rocks, and he said the words that ended it. Not asterisk enough. Better words. United States Marshals, you are under arrest. Lay down or be shot down. The men who came up from Fort Greer have the high ground and the law and would as soon take you cold as warm. There was a moment it could have gone to slaughter. There's always that moment, and I've seen it go the bad way, and I had my own piece up in the timber ready for it. But here's the thing greed does at the end, the thing Ada understood better than any gunman. A man will die for a cause and sometimes for a grudge, but very few men will die for a share of money they've spent the last hour fighting their own friends over. The treasure that drew them apart now saved their lives, because not one of them, in that lantern light with the law on the rim and his own partners already wild-eyed beside him, believed his cut was worth a bullet. Quill himself. I'll give him this, Quill reached, the way the proud ones do, and the federal man's deputy put a charge of buckshot into the rock a foot from his hand. And Quill looked up at the law on the rim and looked down at the empty paper rolls spilling out from under the thin layer of coin, where $11,000 wasn't. And I watched him understand all at once that he'd been led by his own hunger 3 weeks down a road that ended exactly here. That the treasure he'd tortured a good man to death for had never existed in any place his hands could reach, and that a worn-out gunfighter and a stubborn woman had built him a door with no handle and walked him into it. He let the bar fall out of his hands. I think, at the bottom of it, he was almost relieved. Wolves get tired, too. They took the 6 of them down to Fort Greer in irons, and the 4 from before, and the federal man, who turned out to be a decent sort under the careerism, sorted out fast enough. From the broke-armed boy who couldn't stop talking, and from the others trading testimony for their necks. Exactly what had been done to Tom Lyle in his own barn 6 weeks before. So that Quill went down not just for an attempted vault robbery, but for the murder he'd thought he'd buried with an old man's silence. The valley's $11,000 was never found, and is, for all I know, still hidden somewhere on the Lyle place or in the hills above it, in whatever clever spot a cautious old man chose and took to his grave. The town never got it back. That's the true ending, and I won't dress it. Tom Lyle's stubbornness saved the money from Quill, and then his sudden death lost it to everyone, and the widow at Cobb's Crossing buried her husband on credit after all, and the man on Spruce Creek bought his seed on a note. The treasure was real, and it is lost, and the losing of it is the kind of thing that happens in this hard country and doesn't get put right. But the wolf was gone, and that, not the money, was the thing that had been killing them. The valley could live again. A town can rebuild on credit and labor and time. It cannot rebuild while there's a gang gnawing it to the bone over a treasure nobody can produce. We didn't give the people their money back. We gave them their valley. In the long math of it, that was the better trade, and they came to know it. And the sideways looks at Ada in the street turned, slow over that winter, into tipped hats and leftover preserves on the porch rail, and the eventual shamefaced understanding that she'd been telling the truth from the first day. She never had the money. Her father died keeping it, and a town had let a wolf torture a grieving woman over its own foolish trust because it was too afraid to stand. Some of them never could meet her eye after out of the shame of it. Most came around. People mostly do, given a winter to think. I have left the most important part for last, because it was the last part to come true, and because I'm an old man telling this by a stove with snow on the glass, and I've earned the right to take my time getting to the good of it. When it was over, when the irons were on and the law had ridden out, and the lamps of the Lyle place were lit again with all of us in it living instead of left burning to draw moths, I stood in that dooryard in the gray of the morning after, my hands shaking the way they always did after, and I put them in my coat, and I told Ada Lyle I'd be riding on. I meant it too. That was the cruelty I'd built into myself over 10 years. A man who's only ever good for the standing in the yard part, who does the bloody work and then leaves before the morning can ask anything else of him, because staying is the thing he's afraid of. Staying is the thing the graves taught him not to do. I'd done my piece. The yard was safe. Time for the gun to leave before the town remembered to hate it. She heard the whole speech out. She always did. And when I was done, she didn't argue and she didn't ask, because asking wasn't her way. She just reached back into the doorway, the same flat, gentle reach I'd seen the first day, and brought the boy out by the shoulder and set him in front of her. And Davy looked up at me holding that wooden horse I'd whittled him to replace the one his grandfather never finished. And he said, in the plain murdering way children have, "You said you never had a boy." And I said, "No, son, I never did." And Ada Lyle put her hand flat on her boy's chest, over his heart, the way she had that first terrible afternoon when she pressed him back into the dark out of the line of the guns. And she said to me, even and clear and not asking a thing, "You could." That was all. You could. 2 words, the way she did everything, laid down flat where I could see them and left there for me to come to in my own time or not at all. No swoon, no plea, no asterisk stay for me, Wade. Just the true thing, set on the porch rail between us like the first time her hand had covered mine. Here is a yard, and a boy, and a woman, and a place. Here is the exact thing the world took from you 10 years ago, offered back not as a debt you're owed, but as a life you could choose. And you can ride on and be the gun that leaves, or you can set the gun in the corner by the stove and be the man who stays in the yard not just for the fight but for all the gray mornings after. You could. I'd faced down 9 guns in that dooryard and not shook till it was over. This near unmanned me where I stood. I want to tell you I had words. I didn't. I'm not a man of words. I was never worth anything but the one hard skill, and the woman knew it and asked nothing of my tongue. I crossed that yard and I took off my hat, an old habit from a self I'd half forgotten, and I knelt down in the cold mud to be level with the boy, and I took the wooden horse and turned it in my hands like I was inspecting my own work, and I said, "Reckon this fellow needs a stable built, and the colt needs finishing. And there's a barn that wants raising before spring." I looked up at her over the boy's head. "That's a winter's work at least. Be a foolish thing to start and ride off in the middle of." And Ada Lyle smiled, the real one, the dangerous one, the one that had cost her so much the first day and cost her nothing now, and she said, "It would." And she put out her hard, warm hand, and I took it, kneeling there in the mud with the snow coming on, and that was the whole of our asking and our answering. Some things you don't dress up. We raised the barn before the snow closed the pass. We finished the colt. I built the boy his stable and a good deal else besides. We were married by the preacher at Cobb's Crossing on a clear, cold day with half the town there, the half that had come around, and old Prout stood up for me, straight as a fence rail again, the good marshal all the way back now that there was something in his valley worth being good for. I set the gun in the corner by the stove, and there were a good many years, when it never came down, and the hands that had shook after every killing learned a different tiredness. The honest kind, the fence-post-end colt kind, the kind a man can sleep on. Davy grew up tall and took the place over when my knees gave out, and he had children of his own, and one of them is sitting across this room from me now wanting to know, was it true? Did I really face down a whole gang in Grandma Ada's dooryard? And I've told him the truth of it, which is that the gun did the smallest part, and the wits did the most, and the standing in the yard did the rest. And that the bravest person in the whole story was a grieving woman with a shotgun she wasn't pointing at anything yet, who held a secret she didn't have against 9 guns and a frightened town, alone, until a tired man rode down a hill and got to be in the yard, this one time when the wolves came. Ada's been gone 4 winters now. I'll follow before long. You can feel these things coming the way you feel a frost, but I'm not afraid of it the way I was once back when there was nothing waiting for me but more graves. There's a different math now. I had a place and a water and a family, and men came over a thing I had that they wanted, and this time, the once that mattered, I was standing in the yard. I was standing in the yard, and I said the word, and it was enough. It was enough.